So even as the threat of reciprocal tariffs looms large over India at this point in time, is it time for Indian industry to really get their act going? To break it all down and what's at stake, let's just understand this in depth. Two eminent experts joining us. Ajay Dua is the former Commerce Secretary. He's joining us with Jayant Dasgupta, the former ambassador and India's representative to the WTO. Welcome to India tonight, gentlemen. Glad you could join us on what could be a real pivot for India's trade with the world, not just the US. So, Mr. Dasgupta, already India has reduced some duties, and this happened in the last budget. And we were trying to preempt tariffs coming from the US. And like the External Affairs Minister said, this wasn't a surprise. We saw it coming. But the question is, what India did, was it too little too late? Now that the Finance Minister is calling Indian tariffs this legitimate instrument, do you believe that our average tariff of 11% is too high, or do you think we should defend it in the way the Finance Minister is suggesting?
Well, the finance minister has been absolutely correct. Tariffs are a way of having growth in the industry as well as providing consumer welfare. So an optimum kind of a solution has to be found. Now, if we take the auto industry, for instance, it provides employment estimated to be between 3.5 to 3.7 crore people directly and indirectly in India. It contributes around 7% of the Indian GDP. Now, if we were to take a decision to bring down tariffs to zero, as President Trump seems to have advocated, it would have unforeseen consequences. It could, lead to throwing out a lot of people off employment, shutting down of many of our units. So that is the kind of legitimate worry that we may have.
Right.
The second point is that the US, internationally, if you look at the US,
yes,
it is not able to sell Ford cars and General Motor cars outside of the US in large quantities.
Yes.
What it sells is the Tesla car.
Yes.
Now, Tesla is making the cars in China and in Germany and other places.
Sure.
And when Elon Musk was asked this question as to where he would export his cars from, he said because of the sensitivity, he would not do it from China, but he was planning to bring in the cars from Germany.
Sure.
Apart from the taxation angle, how does it provide employment to people in the US?
True.
Now, these are questions which get thrown out.
Correct.
When, this question of globalization of trade,
yes,
manufacturing bases which have been offshored, and employment to the local citizens in the US is concerned.
So you've laid out a lot of issues over here, and we'll try and break it down. But Mr. Dua, just weigh in first. Has India learned from the example of others that it's best to say positive things publicly for private conversations to eventually succeed? Do you think we've learned?
I think so. You just heard the foreign minister.
Yes.
Take a stand which was reconciliatory, to say the least. And as against that, earlier you heard the finance minister, who very categorically said that tariffs is an accepted mode and we're doing nothing wrong by trying to protect our own industries through tariffs. So
correct,
you heard that hot and cold, so to say, is being practiced, and I think it's the right way to go about it.
But Mr. Dua, now India has agreed to buy more American oil, more gas, more military hardware, all of it to increase our overall trade volumes. Is that something that could save India from tariff hikes to an extent, or will Trump see those as just token gestures?
Look, if anybody could predict what Mr. Trump would do, he needs to be.
So there
honored.
is unpredictability. There's no taking away from that. But has India made the right moves according to you?
Yeah, but I think we should not panic, irrespective of whatever the President of the United States may have said in the Congress yesterday, in the joint session of the Congress.
Yes.
And we should look at every suggestion which is put out in the trade talks, which presumably start today, with our trade minister already there, Commerce and Industry Minister. We cannot, we should not throw out the US proposal of saying zero tariff, but we should not accept it either.
So we shouldn't retaliate? Like many of these countries have done, Mexico, Canada, they are going in with retaliatory tariffs. You think India shouldn't do it?
Look, the question is the US imports, the US exports to India. What are the items? The retaliation on what would we react?
Yes.
One, the agriculture items are large. Agriculture means they send us apples, they send us almonds, they send us pistachio. Do you want to hike up the duty? It's to whether it's in your interest if these goods are coming into the country, because earlier some of these were coming from Kashmir, some from Afghanistan, etc.
Yes. It's ultimately the consumers that pay the higher tariffs.
Absolutely. Secondly, oil. We do need oil with such a large 85% of liquid fuel and about 50% of the gaseous coming from outside. If we get one more bigger player in the market,
yes,
it will make sure that the prices come down.
Yes.
We are not in the hands of the oligopoly of the countries in the Middle East or Russia.
Right.
So where is the harm in that of our promising, saying we'll buy your oil, but it has to be competitive.
Right.
The question is...
So you're saying more negotiation. You're saying that don't expect India to take diktats, but you need to kind of negotiate and strike better deals. So in that sense, Mr. Dua, like I was just discussing, by way of this retaliation effort that India could make or make a choice about, should India scrap tariffs on 90% of American industrial goods that are already imported freely under other FTAs? Would that be a smart move? Or you think that the US will then want even more concessions?
I would say let's take on to what President Trump suggested a few days ago when he said reciprocal tariffs. Reciprocal tariffs can be seen and fixed in the FTA for which the negotiations have started. FTA finalization might take a while because we are just starting the process after not making much progress in 2020 when President Trump had suggested it.
Yes.
At that time, probably we were not so keen.
Sure.
So my point is, and here is President Trump, and I think he will stand by it, saying that on 2nd of April, I will kick in the reciprocal tariffs for the 7 countries, with Brazil and India having been added to the earlier 5.
Yes.
So since that's going to be happening, I think if he does impose these reciprocal tariffs on India, let's see which are the items which are no-go for us.
All right.
Agriculture, which is 37%. We need to protect our agriculture with 46% of our workforce in the agricultural sector.
Right.
We need to protect automobile, as Jan just said, with a duty today, we have 24% on auto components.
Yes.
And it varies according to the size.
But Trump himself has often talked about India's 100% tariff on cars, and 150% he's also spoken about industrial ethyl alcohol. So now, Jayant Dasgupta, should India rethink at least those high protective barriers, or are they crucial to our domestic industry, you think?
Well, there could be a debate about this 100%, whether it is really required or we can bring it down substantially. In the budget this year, for cars above $40,000, the duty has been slashed to 70%. That is one. The second thing is for semi-knockdown motorcycles, it has been brought down from 25 to 20%, and for completely knocked down from 15 to 10%.
Yeah.
The other point is, President Trump has several times mentioned Harley-Davidson motorcycles. For up to 1600 cc engine capacity, the budget says that it will be brought down to 40%. So India has been making these moves.
Yes.
And these are welcome moves. But mind you, one thing which has to be borne in mind is that India, being a champion of the international trading order and the World Trade Organization, if it enters into an agreement outside of an FTA,
yes,
it has to provide a most favored nation treatment. That
Right.
is the same tariffs to all the other 165 members of the WTO,
Do you
including
think
the
that wouldn't
US.
work well for India? Because then the
So the
same has
point,
to be applied to all of them.
so the point is, if India were to do that,
Hmm.
whether it would benefit the US or it would benefit China and other countries which are more competitive in
That's right.
selling a particular product.
Right.
So that is also to be,
Considered, yes. But
explained.
you were talking about these cars. Mexico, for one, has exported 3.5 million cars last year itself. India barely managed 0.7 million, despite years of protection. So if Trump is using auto tariffs as that bargaining chip, isn't that a wake-up call, you think, for India's auto sector to become truly competitive in a sense?
Well, there are many issues involved in why India has not been exporting more cars. One of the things is that the whole world has been divided up amongst about 9 or 10 manufacturers, major manufacturers coming from across the globe, and they decide which plant is going to produce what and export to which country. So let us also be aware of how the global system of manufacturing and supply chain management works in the auto industry. So, the point is that India has a 4 million piece car industry, and it caters to the huge domestic demand. And the reason why, 0.7 million only were exported
Yes.
are manifold.
But it still begs the question, Mr. Dua, when there isn't a huge market for premium products, what's the rationale behind high tariffs anyway? Why not just do away with those tariffs and let Indian industry compete globally?
Sure, I think that's a well-made point, particularly because it will add to the competitiveness of the Indian products if they are not protected by high tariff shields. But the question here is, as of now, like agriculture, auto industry, and in that, I divide the auto industry into auto components
Yes.
and the auto assembly industry.
Yes.
The component industry is the one which I think President Trump should be referring to,
Sure.
not the overall.
Right.
We are not much of an exporter of assembled cars.
Yes.
We export to the United States 2.8 billion worth
Right.
of auto components which get used by the automobiles of the US.
Right.
US also exports to us some extent of auto components, but it is barely a third of what we do.
Yes.
So there, my point is, if you are talking of assembly, I think we should have no problem. That reciprocal tariff, fine. If we are levying a certain duty, President Trump, you are free to levy that on your products.
Point well made.
Same.
Yes.
But if it is components,
Yes.
it's in that industry
Fair.
which employs a large number of employees,
Right. Right.
which is the one which counts for
Right.
the GDP.
But while we
number.
were talking about FTAs, and Mr. Dasgupta, do weigh in on this as well, because where India can strike deals now with countries that are affected by Trump's tariffs, so we can look beyond the US as well, like Canada. It has spare oil, it has fertilizers, it has gold, it has copper. You think this is an opportunity for India to look beyond the US for trade partners?
Certainly, I was going to say that for some time, what is done in the United States or what would get done will remain in the realm of uncertainty, to say the least.
Yes.
And in any case, the track record of President Trump in respecting bargains, treaties which have been made is not very encouraging.
Right.
I recall the agreement of NAFTA agreement of North American Treaty arrangement which was made in 1994 between the three major countries of the American continent, North American continent, and some of the island countries and smaller ones.
Yes.
Those were revisited by President Trump arbitrarily, not at the request of others, in 2017, 2018, and that is when he brought in a new treaty.
Fair
given
enough.
its weight in the scheme of things, the other two countries accepted it.
Yes.
And now, 7 years later or 6 years later, he started again talking of saying that treaty did not provide, did not protect us.
Exactly.
Hence, I'm going into another track.
Right.
So I'm not so confident
Yes.
that whatever the FTA we negotiate, for how durable will it be?
That is up in the air. And the unpredictability element always plays up when we're talking to Trump. But as we wind down this discussion, we are still talking about India and US, Mr. Dasgupta. And yes, the two countries have targeted mutual trade of $500 billion by 2030. You think it can be achieved despite all this tariff trouble?
One thing which is required is stability and predictability. And if President Trump keeps, threatening and wielding a big stick,
Yes.
I think the first victim would be trade flows, because the traders may make a quick buck, who are plain traders, but manufacturing industry and things which require a slightly longer gestation period,
Yes.
and setting up of a base, they are not going to flourish in the Indo-US trade.
Right.
So I think this $500 billion bilateral trade may be a distant dream.
A distant
if
dream.
There is no predictability
But is
and
that-
certainty and a deep
Is that going
understanding.
to show up as something that
each
is
other's
lacking in
problems.
Indian industry, sir? Not
Yes.
to rise to the challenge.
Oh, certainly, but I don't think that we should call that a sacrosanct figure which has to be achieved necessarily.
Yes.
For instance, if our diamond exports to the US
Yes.
increase,
Yes.
if our jewelry imports to the US increase, does it help us much? It might get us to that target, but the value added is what we have to see.
Right.
Today we have a bilateral
So we
trade
need a pivot.
where
Yes.
we get gold jewelry made in the US, much more for the sake of the gold rather than
Sure.
the jewelry,
Yes.
which comes there. And from us, the diamonds which cut diamonds, polished diamonds which go there, the value is not really in that, but the real value is in the jewelry,
Fair
which
point.
gets.
Fair
So my
point.
point is,
Yes.
let's not be worried too much
Yes.
about $500 billion.
All right. Fair enough.
Happens, well and good. If it doesn't, we have to make sure that the impact upon us is the least.
Well,
Yeah,
this
and-
tariff trouble is heating up. There's no taking away from that. India has this critical choice to make, though. Either we can dig in and retaliate, or we can recalibrate. We can rethink that entire trade playbook, like both our gentlemen panelists are suggesting. There is no doubt that the coming weeks are going to test our economic resilience, our diplomatic acumen as well. But whether it's trade policy or industrial competitiveness, there is simply no room for complacency right now for Indian industry. We've got to be agile. We've got to grab the opportunities to seize the day, as it were. Big thank you to my panelists, Ajay Dua, Jayant Dasgupta. Thanks for sharing your insights. Always appreciate you joining us on India Tonight. We take a quick break.